Hi, this week's podcast is a compilation of those individuals who have personal knowledge of the 7/7 bombings in 2005. This contains harrowing descriptions of what they saw and what took place in their lives. Andy Hymon.
So then in the July, we got the Olympic vote.
Yeah.
So we get that and we're on it in London. Fantastic. Let's go out and celebrate that. I go into the office normal time. I usually go to the gym before I went in the office. I'm on the running machine and I'm thinking, right, we've got the vote. I know what's going to happen. I'm going to get pulled into number 10. So dust down all the plans. So what is the security plan? We now start me doing that. And then I'm in the office and then the deputy comes in and says, oh, no, just to let you know, there's a couple of fires on the underground. Oh, really? I said, it's strange. What's all that about? It's nothing, it's just a couple of fires. Nothing to worry about. So I ring Peter Clark, who was my deputy who headed up counter-terrorism, anti-terrorism it was at the time. And he said, I'm not quite sure about that. He says, don't normally get two fires on in quick succession like that. And then as things unfolded, we then realised it's not. It's a 7/7 terrorist attack. And I remember sitting in the office thinking, it's all right walking around like, you've made it because you've got like the best job, because you're a senior chief constable, but you're also kicking doors in operationally. So it's all right saying, I've landed, here we are. But now you've got to start doing it. And I just sat in the office and thought, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I've got 4 bombs.
That's very honest.
Yeah. So I said to Peter, what are we going to do then? He said, I don't know. He said, we got the plans. We can methodically investigate it. But, as things unfolded, it became clear that this was not just a terrorist attack, which we thought we'd planned for them coming from outside the UK to attack. We never thought they would be homegrown. So it threw all the investigation strategies out the window. But again, a bit like the corruption, I was so lucky to have a fantastic, experienced team. And the incident room went round 2 floors at the yard. But the most moving period about all of that, I don't really know the story, but the bombers did a recce about 2 weeks previous, so they did a dry run. And that's where we picked up on the CCTV. And they were going to do 4 trains.
Right.
But if you remember, it was a bus.
Tavistock Square.
Yeah. Ironically, outside the General Medical Council, which is ironic. What happened is that bomber, he gets on the train and his battery on the detonator had gone flat, so it never went off. So he's now thinking, they knew what time they were going to do. They peaked it for the most busiest time on the underground. So he comes off at King's Cross, goes up to WH Smith, buys another couple of batteries to put into the detonator, and then he thinks, well, I now know that the other bomb's gone off because I know that's what they're going to do. What am I going to do? So he goes out of King's Cross, gets on a bus, and I actually, the most iconic scene from all of that, because the trains were underground, was in fact the double-decker bus, which 21/7, which was unsuccessful, they didn't know about the existence of 7/7, and they shifted their plans to do a bus, which they did in the East End, or tried to do, because of the iconic nature. Anyway, part of the investigation, which we learned from 9/11, is you get all the victims and survivors and their families into a big hall and you address them as to what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And I remember sitting there and there's all the FLOs sitting alongside the walking wounded and the bereaved. And this, if I needed one telling moment that says, Hymon, just get over yourself. This is reality. It was a guy, I've given them an address. Peter had said what the strategy was to investigate. And this guy gets up, puts his hand up. He says, Mr. Hymon. He said, you've got a question? Yeah, fine, fire away. He said, I know you can answer this. He says, but it's really important to me that I ask it. So he said, my son, he was going for a job interview and he doesn't know London at all. And we'd done a dry run about a week ago, so he knew what to do. So he gets on the underground and the bombs have gone off and the underground stops. So he gets off the train and he says, why is it that the first bus he gets on, he lost his life?
No, I don't.
And I thought, that you could hear a pin drop. And that's when the reality kicked in that this is not about how you feel about our job is. This is about what you've got to do for bereaved families.
Honestly, mate, it still leaves me cold to this day. And I remember where I was when that happened. Don Randall. Whilst you're at JP Morgan, we have the biggest terror attack on mainland England, mainland UK, in our history. From a business continuity perspective, what was that like when the July 7th bombings took place?
Yeah, 7/7. So I just landed in Frankfurt, and Paul Escrit, has always been with me on the Crime Prevention Association, and in fact, we actually were cadets together. And he rang me. He said, "I think we've got a terrorist activity in London." So effectively, I turned things around, and you mentioned Frank was commander then, and James Hart was the commissioner, and so we created the sister banks, if you remember. So we had the sister banks calls going, and we were doing, and as you rightly say, biggest attack ever. We'd never experienced a series of attacks, and we sadly, this story I think is known, but probably not well known, but we lost a young person in Tavistock Square, and this young man, I think he was 23. He was actually on the King's Cross train. Yeah, got out without injury. Phones up. He was part of the investment bank, which was just off Ropemaker Street. Phoned up and said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm going to be a very dedicated young man, 23. I'm really sorry, I'm going to be late. There's an incident. I don't know what it is." He gets on the bus and gets killed on the bus. Talk about bad luck. So we had that, but of course he was missing, and we were trying to collate that. And then Frank rang, and he said, "Are you coming back?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I'm." He said, "Well, James would like to meet you." He said, because he really wants to understand what we need to do to restore confidence in this business sector in the City of London. And I got back. I flew into Docklands, and we met that early evening. And I'd had the sister banks calls, and I remember with James, I thought all the commissioners have been good. They've all got their own little different personalities. And I said, "James, you just got to put yourself on parade. You got to let the business sector know." Yeah, I said, "I think we should have a sister banks meeting, like 11 o'clock tomorrow morning." I said, "You personally, I think you should be at Liverpool Street Station, square and centre, as the commissioner for the city." And we did. He did that, and we actually held the sister banks meeting. And I remember it was during that period of time, during the old Blackberries, yeah. And there was that issue about, are Blackberries safe? Are they not safe? Or not that? And I remember James, he had a paranoia about Blackberries, and we sat round the table at 10 Aldermanbury, and he says, "I want everybody's BlackBerry switched off." And we go, "Why?" He goes, "Because I do." And then we just laid it on the table what we thought needed to be done. And of course, the sister banks, was formed when we formed that in 1996. Very, very strong international presence, and real pressure from the states as to what we should and shouldn't do, but collectively it worked. So yeah, that was 7/7.
Rebecca Walker, were you there during 7/7 in the city?
Yes, I was on late turn at Bishopsgate, but trying to get in for late turn was the challenge, because I still lived out in Harrow.
Right.
And I popped out shopping, and I went back home, and my dad was there, and he said, "Oh, there's been this thing happening in London." This was about 9:30 in the morning. And I went off for late turn and got to the railway station. They said there are no trains. So I actually walked from there to Wembley, which is a fair way.
Yeah.
And they just started to run the buses again. So I managed to jump on a bus at Wembley, and I got as far as the west side of Paddington Green. And they said, we're not allowed in, we can't go any further. So I walked from Paddington Green to the city, which was really bizarre, because I kept coming up against cordons, so I kept getting knocked off course and I know London pretty well, so I was finding my way around. But I was one of very, very, very few people walking towards central London. Yeah. Everybody else was walking out. it was really odd. It was like, mass evacuation of London. Here am I going that way towards what's going on.
And we say, don't we, officers run towards trouble and danger, and I think that's lost as well on the public, because they seem to forget that they still have to maintain their job, wherever that job may be.
Yeah. And I managed eventually to get to Bishopsgate. I think it was 4:30.
Wow.
And then after that, we spent several days on cordons down at Aldgate while everything was being processed. And again, a funny thing about the city, because people who work in the city tend to have worked there for years, you get people coming up to you at the cordon saying, well, I need to go that way through there because that's how I get to work. Yeah. And we're like, well, you can't today. Well, I don't know any other way. So you'd be busy directing people who for like the past 20 years have gone that way to work, and suddenly.
Yeah, people don't like change.
No.
Did you get involved in any of the investigation or the search stuff on that?
No, not for that one.
No,
not for that one. Purely uniform, standing on cordons for that. Which that had its moments, because again, people think, oh, you're just standing on a cordon. But I remember I was a sergeant at the time, and one of the PCs calling me over and saying, oh, these people they're looking for somebody who and this was probably about 3 days afterwards.
Heartbreaking.
They're looking for someone. And I don't quite know what to tell them to do. So I went across to chat to them, and they were holding this photograph of this young lady they were looking for, who's a family member. And all I could say to them was, have you spoken to Casualty Bureau? You need to phone. And they said, we've done that. We've been to the hospital. She's not there. She's not there. She's not there. And I said, well, you need to speak to Casualty Bureau. Again, if you've not spoken to them, you need to phone them up and give them the details, and they will keep in touch with you. And I think sometimes police officers go to jobs and you walk away and you've forgotten all about it. But that one, I can remember in the days after that, as the papers started to publish photographs of those who'd been killed, looking every day at the pictures being published to see if she was there. And one day she was, with the same photograph that they presented to me at the cordon, and you just think, and that was how many years ago? Yeah, I know. I've not forgotten that one. No. And there's stuff you don't forget. There are people who stay with you and jobs that stay with you. Yeah,
there are. And, the good and the bad. And you just think. Sharon Herbert on the tube and, on the 7/7 stuff.
Yeah, so I was on my way in. So Rich, my husband, was also a police officer. He was Rich was early turn.
Right.
He was in the control room. I was literally on a train stuck outside King's Cross. Being held for what we now know, obvious reasons. I was sat with a reporter, and again, going back to those days, I didn't have a mobile phone, but I had my job radio with me. So I pinged my job radio on and thought, this isn't a power cut. There's a lot more to this. We were going nowhere on the train, and I just thought, hellbent, I need to get into the city. And there was a group of us in the front of the carriage that actually managed to open up the doors, and we ended up walking down the line between where we were and into the station. And it was just bedlam, absolute bedlam. And again, not being able to use the radio and everything else, I ended up then walking all the way from King's Cross, so it's not that far, down into Snow Hill. And again, every man and his wife was out. And there was still a big anomaly as to the extent of the morning as it unfolded. So at that point, we hadn't had the bus go off. So I was there. I didn't go down, and I didn't see any carnage. I didn't see anything too traumatic. I had stuff coming to me from Rich in the control room and listening to it all unfold on the radio. I was given the role of community engagement for the morning and into the afternoon. So I was primarily office-based. A couple of days after that, after we'd moved on to a 12-hour shift pattern, I'd spent some time up at the mortuary, which was up at the HAC, the Honourable Artillery Company. And again, the irony of that was where I then subsequently ran our cadet unit. A bittersweet relationship with the HAC for me.
I interviewed a guy called Gary Hayes who works in the mortuary there, and it had a massive impact on him as an individual. And of course, you're working in the city where this is all happening around you.
Yeah.
You're looking at and the thing is, as the community person, you're dealing with it within a community that there are suspicions at that time that members of that community are responsible for these atrocities. It must have been a very difficult situation from your perspective.
There was a lot of fear. And that aside, it was more the fear. I think we can all sit and remember where we were when we watched the planes go into the Twin Towers. Yeah. I was on I was doing a upgrade course. What was it when you used to do the terror searches? My mind's gone blank.
Pulsar searches.
Pulsar, an update Pulsar course. So we were sat there watching the Twin Towers. Now fast forward those years, and now this. The landscape of policing had shifted humongously, and and again, I think the fear of not just the fear from the community, but fear within the police officers themselves of I might not actually be going home today.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's quite a unique fear in the city. Bearing in mind we'd had all these resources, all of this response, everyone's got your back, and all of a sudden the landscape's changed in such a way that you don't know where that threat is anymore. And I think actually that was one of the hardest things to navigate, rather than the actual fear of the community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting because I was up there the other week and I was with a friend, and he said, "Oh, do you know what? I can't find a bin anywhere." I said, "No, you won't be able to find a bin anywhere because that's where people would have put bombs." Gary Hayes, 2005.
Yeah.
Okay, 7th of July, 2005. I remember where I was on that day. I was working on a murder. And I remember seeing it on the news, and I remember how I felt at that time. And interesting enough, I've just been talking to the girls before you came, and they said, "Oh, what's Gary going to say?" And I told them. And Emma said, "I was on the tube. I just got off the tube. I just got into work," because she worked for Lloyd's at the time.
Blimey.
She said, "I just got off the tube, just got into work." She said, "And I remember it happening. And I remember people coming in, having been on the tube. And I remember, this is her, having to walk. They walked from Liverpool Street to Stratford because that was the only way they were going to get home."
Yeah. So for me, I wasn't actually at work at the time. I was part of our sort of, how can I describe it? The new all singing, all dancing BTP counter-terrorism team.
Right.
It was new in its formation. And it was going to be, how it was sold to us, a very proactive group of cops. So the build up to 7/7, my wife was heavily pregnant with our third son. Now, she was based over at Holborn at the time.
Yeah.
And like she'd done with our first two boys, she actually worked right up until the due date, and then sort of went into labour and was whisked away and blah, blah. Thankfully, our third son cut 3 days early. Had he come on the due date, she would have been on the Allgate train that went up.
Right.
We got that down to a very fine timeline of about a minute. She would have been on it, there's no doubt.
Wow.
So she called me, and I was in Tesco's buying some nappies, and she went, "Oh, you heard what's happened on the Underground?" No, I'm in Tesco's buying nappies. But straight away, my mind's thinking, because we knew something was afoot at the time, but like most terrorists or acts of terrorism, you know it's going to happen, but you can't time in, place in, whatever. So I went, right, I'll phone you back in a minute. So I got on the phone to one of the lads, and I could hear the blues going. And he just said, "Go, get your grab kit, mate. We've just been bombed." I was like, "Fucking hell." Right, okay. He went, "Stand by." So we've just been bombed again. So I'm right. I'm not going to be able to get in the day. The network's going to close down. I said, obviously the phone's going to go down soon. I'll be in tomorrow. Because London would have been as it was. It was gridlocked. I couldn't even drive in. So I went back in the following day, and I ended up running a serial at Charing Cross. And I was there for 2 days, and it was just pandemonium because the network was trying to, I don't know, redesign itself, keep it running, keep London working. And we had a couple of incidents down there before I move on to the sort of crux of this, where underground staff and some BTP cops have access to the tannoy system on the underground.
Yep.
Still to this day have no idea how this person or who this person was. But they managed to get on the tannoy at Charing Cross and announced that the next incoming train had a bomb on it.
Oh, my life.
The station was packed. I mean, it was packed to being dangerously overflowing.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the panic and mayhem. And as this train come in, I was just thinking, this can't be happening. And the train doors open and people were just rammed in there. And I forced my way on and I sent members of my team along the platform to do exactly what I was about to do. Got into this carriage and I just said, right, if anyone's got any personal items with them, I want you to pick them up and show me. And do you know what? It's almost regimented where everyone picks up bags, newspapers, and just held them in the air. Got everyone off, got the station cleared. It happened twice whilst we was there. So we couldn't find who the sort of perpetrator that was. The following day, my boss came up and he said, right, we're sort of like 3 days into the aftermath now of the bombings. He said, you're ex-military, aren't you? So I went, yeah, a long time ago. He went, good. Sort of looking at him. And he went, people are falling down at the Honourable Artillery Company where the temporary mortuary is. I need you to go. So I said, well, no. I said, as far as I know, it's sergeants that are. He went, yeah. He says, congratulations. There you go. Off you Todd. And I spent the next 2 months down at the HAC helping to identify the 52 victims and process the body parts of all the other people and what was left of the bombers. It was not a pleasant job by any means. And, you know, I'd had my fair share of fatalities on the railway network at that point anyway. But yeah,
I think I think that anybody listening, there are certain smells and noises and atmosphere that come with a mortuary.
Yeah.
Any mortuary, you walk in there. I mean, I do find postmortems fascinating.
Yeah,
I'll be honest with you. You know, it's a bit weird. I understand that, but there are, you know, the smell of chloroform. There's all the other bits.
Yeah.
But when you're in a temporary mortuary and you've got 52 victims in there, that is magnified enormously.
Yeah.
What was that like working as part of that team?
It was amazing. It was a multi-force sort of operation. So the guys that were primarily running the HAC were DVIs from the Met Police and some other forces. And they'd not long been back from dealing with the final bits and pieces from the Boxing Day tsunami.
Of course.
So it was like, you was listening to some of the stuff they'd dealt with. And I remember the first victim that we went to start doing what we were going to do with them. The skipper in the team said to us, look, he said, you don't have to do this. And I'm going to tell you now what you're about to look at will just blow you away. All right. So if you don't want to do it, it's not a problem. And me and the lad I was with was like, no, we'll be all right. And we opened up the first bag and it was indescribable. Bearing in mind that other than the victims from the bus bombing, all the other victims have been stuck in the trains on the tunnels. If you remember, it's really hot.
Yeah.
So decomposition was huge. I mean, I've
Rapid.
I've seen bodies in various states from being hit by sort of both underground trains and fast trains. But the decomposition and the blast injuries was like nothing I've ever seen. In this first bag, a lot of them, in fact, I would suggest every bag that we had was double bagged because of the content of I won't get too graphic, but the breakdown of the body. Yeah, it was that. Me and my mate just looked at each other, and I'll never forget it. I sort of turned around to this skipper and went, "Gonna need a big loaf of bread to mop up this bit of soup, haven't we?" And he looked at us and he went, "Right, you'll be all right." And that's how it was. We was all on first name terms, nicknames. There were lots of mixed ranks in there, and I put my own sort of safeguarding in because obviously everyone now the Sun newspaper being, I can't think of a descriptive for it, but they managed to get what they perceived to be like these little grainy passport photos of the victims. Now, to me, I showed the deceased as much dignity as I could, along with everyone else.
Yeah.
But it becomes too personalised if you know that was Mr. A from place B, whatever.
Yes.
So to me, they just followed the set of numbers that come with a DVI book.
And DVI's disaster victim identification.
Yeah. And there was sort of two books. We had a UK book and then an Interpol book, which was slightly different. So one of my jobs was to, having assisted with identification of that individual, and bearing in mind we never had any freezers for about 4 weeks, so the smell, going back to your earlier point, was honking, and I mean it was awful. And ironically, I think a good thing that set me up there was next to our main sort of tent, we had like the little cookhouse. So if you go around, step out of our tent, and then there was a little one just around the corner and go and get a bacon roll and a brew. But the smell was just like, and people say, how on earth can you eat that? Red sauce dripping out me bacon roll. And it was just like, you just got on with it.
But that's what we do.
Yeah. And I think it's probably will lead on to it. But being a police officer, irrespective of what force you're in or whatever part of emergency services, we normalise what quite clearly isn't normal.
Yeah.
To just help us to get through our day. Just sort of digressing a wee bit from the mortuary, we used to do sort of minimal 12, 14-hour days there. And I remember travelling back home to where I live now in Hornchurch, and I listened to members of the public whinging about the trains being disrupted, or it stopped them from getting down a pub or doing this, doing that. And I used to get quite angry listening to those conversations. And I'll never forget, I had a particularly bad day. And there was a group of builders, when you manage to get on the same train, and is that familiarity where that's where they sit. And well, one night was coming home and I was listening to this bloke gobbing off about how poor the police sort of work rate is in identifying who the bombers were and who they belonged to. And more importantly, how it was messing up these Friday nights getting down the pub. And I lost the plot on the train. And I used to travel up in civvies, and bear in mind it was still really hot, so invariably I'll be in shorts because that's what we used to wear in the mortuary, but put the white suits on and whatever else afterwards. And I remember getting a grip with this geezer and throwing a few sentences into him, and all his mates stood up, and I was ready to take them all on. And I said to them, do you know what, fellas? I said, if you could have spent 2 seconds of your day to where I've just been and what I've just seen and what I've dealt with and what I'm going to go back to tomorrow, then perhaps you might have a different point of view. And this bloke went, no, in Copper or something. And I went, funny enough, I am, mate. And I'm working in a mortuary, identifying all those people you've just been talking about. And bizarrely, the whole carriage went deadly quiet. And I was like, I had steam coming out of me. It's, in some respects, a little bit unprofessional, but I'd been there a couple of weeks and we was taking a lot of grief from the sort of the slow processes in identifying people. And there was a family that had been on the news. I think they were like from Africa or somewhere like that. And they were desperate to find their son. Yeah. But of course, there's this issue that we're now being a bit racist in identifying the victims. Goodness me.
There's equality in the mortuary. There's total equality. You
absolutely. Can't. And that was winding me up because I knew we were doing our best.
Yeah.
And then this one geezer at this group, he just stood up and went, I'm really sorry, mate, and thanks for what you're doing. And it was almost like a little snooker clap went around the train carriage.
Yeah.
And I was just sort of like very angry, but thankfully we got close to my station there on Park. Got off, got in, and I'll never forget it. I went straight to my newborn baby and just held him. And apparently that night I went backward and forward between the other two boys' rooms and didn't go to sleep. I was just sort of like, I was in a bizarre place.
Yeah.
But I didn't know it.
But that's your emotions. And the thing about it is, take away the police and the military aspect, we are human. Thank you for listening to this episode of X Job Downloaded. Please like, follow and share. Your support is invaluable. Thank you.